Hi, so welcome to our third episode of the State Enforcer You Need to Know series. I'm Kelsey Paine. I'm an Assistant Attorney General in the Texas office, and today we're interviewing Gwendolyn Cooley, who is an Assistant Attorney General in the Wisconsin AG office. So Gwendolyn, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
So the point of the series is to get to know some of our state enforcers and to introduce them to members of the ABA. We feel like it's especially important this year, given that we've had pretty limited networking opportunities so far. So today we'll be talking a little bit about what you do and the Wisconsin office and then some of the cases that you've worked on. So to start out, could you tell me a little bit more about what you do and what your role in Wisconsin is?
Yes, so I have been for the last 16 years the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust for the state of Wisconsin. That it's a smaller office, so I have one other attorney in my office, and we have a paralegal, but we make big things happen with our very small office. We are in charge of all of the conduct and merger enforcement that affects the state of Wisconsin. So it's quite a big task, but we rely on all the resources we can to get that done.
Might have been easier to ask what you don't do in Wisconsin, it sounds like. So how did you get into antitrust and what do you like about it?
So I got into antitrust somewhat by accident, as many people do. My mentor was the Attorney General at the time, and she suggested that I pursue antitrust because I had worked in Congress and for U.S. Senator Cole, and she thought that that would be a good fit. I did not do antitrust for Senator Cole, but she thought it would be a good fit, and it turns out that I really loved learning about so many businesses. I love how intellectually rigorous this area of practice is. One of the things that's so interesting and unique about antitrust and consumer protection, and there's a couple of other areas within the AG's offices that this is the case, but we do so many matters with other states. I work with you, Kelsey, in Texas on a number of cases. We've got we've got a whole range of cases, and it's such an interesting, in a time where we're hearing from the newly sworn in president that we should be uniting. Our group is such a great example of that unity because it's nonpartisan staff working together in very different states, but really focused on these specific issues. So I've just always thought that that was such a fun, unique slice of America.
That's one of the things that I really like about it too. I love getting to work with people from other offices. But I think for you, it might be especially important is you're such a small office in contrast to the last two enforcers that we interviewed. So I'm wondering if you maybe rely on other AGs and other state AGs and other offices on multi-state matters and sort of use them as an extension of coworkers in a way.
Well, so I think that NAG very much is somewhat set up like a law firm. There are definitely people who are senior partners, and there are some splashy younger partners as well. But and there are people who do a lot more of the associate type work, especially on these bigger cases. But I think that the key thing that I have learned from both of my predecessors in my position, including Kevin O'Connor, who's well known within the section, is that you really do have to work with the resources you have. So that means I work on the multi-state cases, because I used to work in Congress, I can't kind of come up with this congressional office style, we have committees and then there's a chair of each committee and, they're responsible for specific things. So if you do these big multi-state cases, that kind of organizational aspect is super important. But there's also, even on cases that are just within Wisconsin, often there's a federal partner, and we work really well with both the FTC and U.S. Department of Justice, typically. But we always work really well with the staff in those offices. And it's been amazing, even for those cases where it's like a Wisconsin only matter when I was first. So I became essentially the chief of the antitrust, it's not really a section, but the section, when I had been practicing for 2 years, which was interesting. But I was able to, even on an in-state matter, call my colleagues across the country and say, you know, there's this situation going on. How do you handle it? What do you do? And they, you know, that's kind of the idea of this multi-state group, is being able to rely on other people, even when we're not, you know, like Suboxone, where we've got this organizational structure and everybody has clear responsibilities and things like that. It's such also a great informal network where you can reach out and ask good or bad questions as necessary.
That is, I did not know you took over at 2 years. That's so impressive. I'm starting my 3rd year now, and I could not fathom taking over a division right now. I know you mentioned you worked in Congress and then went to the AG. Was there a stop in between, or what made you get specifically into the AG?
Well, so I had actually worked on the stop in between was law school. I had worked on the campaign for my attorney general, and so she was able to put me into her office, and I think knew enough about me to know that I would be able to competently handle the antitrust work. I think I've competently handled it for the last 16 years, but I've now served under 4 attorneys general, both 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So, and most of that time I've spent working for Republicans, but I'm quite proud of the fact that, right, we have these nonpartisan career civil service type positions, and it really, despite coming in as, you know, through an attorney general who I had worked on her campaign, I think it's, I think having that kind of mentorship to teach me, that she gave me, that mentorship to teach me the importance of civil service and how to approach that, I think that was really helpful.
So you've been with the AG 16 years now. I'm sure you've had lots of really interesting cases. What are some of your favorites or the more well-known cases that you've worked on?
So I have worked on most of the well-known cases that the state AGs have worked on. There's definitely been some talk lately that the state AGs are, you know, are coming to the center, we're doing more cases. I feel like we've always been doing a lot of cases. It's just that now we're getting the attention for it, which is great. I have worked on, so one of the very first cases I did when I had been practicing for, I think, about 3 or 4 months was I helped draft the complaint in the Paxil case that we brought. That went well. I worked on the LCD's case, the DRAM case, which lasted so long. But more recently, I am the lead attorney for the states on the Suboxone case. We have 42 states, and that's a product hopping case. I was on the trial team in the T-Mobile case, the state's challenge to T-Mobile, ultimately unsuccessful state's challenge to T-Mobile, but I also, and this is public record, you know, my office is working on the tech cases that everyone is familiar with.
So do you have a favorite case in all of them?
So actually one of my favorite cases is not one that I mentioned. And the pair of Dean Foods related cases, which were kind of U.S. Department of Justice and state of Wisconsin, and sometimes some other states, actually 2 totally different sets of states. Those are actually my favorite cases because the dairy industry is so important to the state of Wisconsin, and it's close to my heart, having spent a lifetime in Wisconsin service. So it's good to be able to keep an eye on that industry and do something that hopefully is working. And in this latest DFA Dean transaction, we were able to, the state of Wisconsin and the U.S. Department of Justice, were able to get 2 divestitures related to plants that are in or near Wisconsin. So that one's super important to me, and I'm really glad that we got such a good result. In a really tough time. I mean, this happened right in the spring of the pandemic. So like right when it was the first outbreak and we weren't sure what was going to happen. So I'm really proud of that case.
That sounds like a really interesting case. I'll have to talk more about that one later. So I wanted to also ask about how the pandemic has impacted the Wisconsin office. Has it changed the way you all work? I'm sure there are lots of negative impacts. Can you think of any positive changes or ways in which this will probably impact the office moving forward in a positive way?
So I think we were ideally suited, and I think most of the attorneys general offices were ideally suited to transitioning to remote work, because so much of what we do is, I'm calling Texas, I'm calling Sarah Allen in Virginia, Liz Brady in Florida, and I'm talking to them on the phone. So I can talk to them on the phone when I'm sitting in my pink attic office or when I'm sitting in my downtown office with a view of the jail. So the nice thing about this is that I don't have to waste 45 minutes commuting in and out of town. And so I get to spend all that time working. But I think there are actually, for me, and this is not true for everyone, obviously, because it's an incredibly economically difficult time. And, obviously people are literally dying. But for those folks who are able to stay at home, there are so many benefits that I wouldn't have thought of. I get to spend a lot more time, incidental time with my family, because I was always working. I would go to work and then come home and work. And so then that incidental time in the evening would be, no one was upset about it, but it's nice to now be able to have the conversation when I go down and get my 50th cup of coffee at 1 p.m. and be able to have a conversation with my stepson about his classes. So I think that there's some really nice benefits to it. I would say the biggest downside, as we all know, is technology, but I have been so heartened. I mean, we all went straight to Zoom. I know the ABA was going to do a training on how to use Zoom, but we basically trained each other. I mean, I have sat on calls with Eric Lippman from Uber saying, okay, no, you just click the button in the upper right hand. I mean, we all trained each other. And I think that's one of those things that when we look back on the pandemic, we are really going to be so impressed with how we handled that. And I mean, talk about unsung heroes, those poor tech people having to put up with all of us working on our various different home computers. I mean, it's just amazing. But one more thing about the pandemic I want to say and give credit to Tara Kozlov from the FTC. She said early on in the pandemic, she read an article that was essentially like, what are you going to look back at the pandemic and wish you had done? And why aren't you doing that? And I hope she doesn't feel upset that I say this, but she said hers was exercise and she was able to do that and has really enjoyed it. I have done so many of those things now. I wanted to take some time to read more of those books that I would always buy, and especially the antitrust books that I would buy and then they would sit on the shelf. So taking that time that I would be otherwise commuting, doing that. I'm having a morning commute I take a walk every single morning, even this morning when it was 7 degrees. So just doing some of those things I think has really helped mental health wise, because this is a tough time for everyone. And just, we have to try and continue to reach out and be there for each other.
Do you have a favorite book out of the ones that you've gotten to read recently?
So I have read a number of very scholarly, important books, but my favorite one so far has been about the plague, the Black Death of 1435. But I think that this has also been a really good time to read, to finally get through, The Curse of Bigness and the Jonathan Baker Antitrust Paradigm book and stuff like that. I mean, those are good books, and this is actually the time when you can actually do that and you're not lugging a big heavy book back and forth or on a plane. So that's been really nice.
So when I started 3 years ago in the state AG's office in antitrust, one of the first things I noticed is there are so many women that are state enforcers, and they are thought of as the go-to people, and they are leads on so many of the cases. And I just think that's really cool in an industry where law is still pretty male dominated at the partner level. So what is it like for you? Because I definitely consider you one of those leaders to work with that group of women. And is this a trend that you've seen change over the years that you've been at the AG?
I think I agree with you. It's great. And I think the reason for it is because, as you know, from personal experience, you start off in an AG's office, you know, we don't have a ton of resources. So you get put on these cases really early, right? Early in your career. So you're not worrying about where the staple is on this thing that you have to physically go and file. You are like, okay, you are in it to win it. I rather read an interview with Barry Nigro talking about his time at the Antitrust Division. And he was talking about one of the real challenges is staff, not having enough staff and making sure there's enough funding. And I think that's true in the AG's offices. I mean, that has been a problem the whole 16 years I've been here. It's like, there's not enough people to do all the work that we want done. But I think we are able to retain some of the really good talent, which is crucial because you can get a lot more work out of that talent that you're able to retain when you give them good cases and do things like that. But it's fabulous to work with, you know, I could name drop 20 of them, but there's a lot of really great women and there's some really great men as well who work together and do these cases. It's pretty fun.
You've mentioned before how involved you are in NAG and the ABA, and I don't think I've ever been to a networking event where you weren't organizing or involved in a panel. So first, how on earth do you have time for this, plus running a division? And then second, why is it so important to you to be involved in these other programs?
So, I've heard the story of the professor who's had the empty jar that he filled up with rocks. And is the jar full? Well, yes, it's full. And then you add the sand, and is it full? Yes, it's full. And then you add water, and is it full? My husband would say, then you add ice cream, and it's still, right? Like it's amazing how much you can do. And so I believe in kind of leaning in and saying yes when you can, not anticipating, right? Say yes when you can, and don't shy away from saying yes. That's everything we're doing, right? Like the way I get it done is teamwork, right? We build a good team. On Suboxone, how am I the lead attorney for this huge case? It's because we have a good team, right? How do Liz Brady and I handle being chair of the State Enforcement Committee? It's because we have a good team. We divide and conquer. That's true. As you mentioned, in NAG, I'm the co-chair of the Pharmaceutical Industry Working Group, but I'm the co-chair with Beth Finnerty from Ohio. And so, we have a good team and we're able to get things done that way. One of the programs that I'm not co-chairing, but I kind of initiated was a mentorship program for NAG. And essentially my idea was, and let me toot my own horn, but I think it's a great idea, is to pair mentors from different offices so you can ask the dumb question that you need to ask without someone who actually has control over your paycheck saying, like that's a really stupid question. But sometimes they're really great questions, and then you can say, yeah, you should be asking that question. And so the reason I do that and the reason I think it's so important is because you cannot it's self-interested. If we have good people that we are able to retain, both mentors and mentees, then our ability to do the work is much better and stronger. And so that's why I think it's so important. And it's not hard, right? If you have, right, like we have time to do things. You just have to prioritize.
Well, I definitely think the mentor program is a great idea. I feel like I've learned a ton from you over the last year as you've been my mentor. We're running out of time, but one last question. You have all this experience, and what advice would you give to new state enforcers?
So my main advice to new state enforcers, to new attorneys across the board would be make yourself useful. You will be in a room with someone who either does know everything or thinks they know everything. And so how can you be useful? You can fight with them and tell them that they don't know everything. Or you can go and be the person who knows everything there is to know about the documents. If you know that, and let's be real, senior partners are not going to do all the document review. So that is such an easy way to go and be the person who knows, because if you know the one document that says the thing, I mean, that's priceless. You may also be the one who actually knows the law better because the senior partner read the case 20 years ago when it first came out and they kind of vaguely remember, but they haven't looked at it since. So you can be the one who actually is like, oh, but what do you think about how this paragraph does that? So make yourself invaluable and don't be afraid of the menial work. I have done a lot of menial work. Even leaders do a lot of menial work, and don't be afraid of it. That's part of life. So that's my thought.
That sounds like great advice. So I think we are out of time, but thank you so much for being here. It's been so great getting to know you a little bit better.
My pleasure. Thanks, Kelsey.